Well, welcome to the No Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
And he's
me.
Tim.
Okay, I'm Tim Wade. I thought I was going to be last.
Yeah, and my name is Joe Augustin. Welcome to the No Show, in the sense that what we've done is we have gone back to the drawing board and said, how can we do this show a little better so that you can watch a show that leaves you understanding the world we live in a little better, and so that you'll be empowered to make a difference as well. We think if more people knew exactly what was going on and knew how to think about things a bit more, we could all be a little bit better off. So welcome to the show. It's a 1-hour show, lots of ground to cover. So let's hop right into it, shall we?
Oh, well, before we do, I wanted to wish my mum a happy birthday. She's 76 today. And also Ferenc, one of my friends here in Phuket, who is a regular listener of the show. He's 60th today. So happy birthday to both of you.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to Andrea's mum and friend who's 60. Happy birthday to you.
Nice.
And that's all part of the show as well.
Well, now we're behind time immediately.
Yeah, no,
but you did need to know that. Yeah.
But yeah, so
birthday.
Just a conversation around what's been going on this week as far as the Queen's concerned, especially if you're living in a Commonwealth country. The chances are all of your media has been pummeled by news of the Queen every step of the way. And, obviously there's a lot of, the majority of it has been respectful, but there's another side of the story that people are sharing more and more, and that is her legacy, which, there's a lot of atrocities that have happened in her name, in her time, and people are talking about that. Talk of republics is starting to rise. Even New Zealand were bringing it up the other day, but said it's not the right time. But King Charles III, I'm still finding that a weird sort of idea. He's made a couple of silly little mistakes and the media seems to be jumping all over them. But one of the mistakes that was pulled out was that he's appointed Prince Andrew as Counselor of State. And I was looking into this, and there's quite a few media that have been saying this. And actually, it's incorrect. He has been a Counselor of State for quite a few decades now. So to be a Counselor of State, it's the next 4 in line to the throne. So right now, Camilla and Beatrice have been added to the list, and Harry and Andrew may be removed from the list. So that's not a fact, let's just say. What do you guys think? I mean, everyone's talking about it in lots and lots and lots of different ways. What's your sort of take? Wait a minute, we've got some background going on there.
With regards to gaffes? Any
of it? Just the whole week. What are you paying attention to?
Oh, well, for me, it's been I had a friend of mine who posted on social media, "The Queen has died, yawn." And that was just it. And I sort of went in and went, I think you should take that post down. And it got reaction from others who agreed with that sentiment. But the reason why I thought you should take it down was because I just think I think that's I just don't think I think we can go back to parental guidance of, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all, especially during a time that millions of people are feeling a sense of loss. And even me, I don't know about you two, but I was surprised how moved I was by her loss.
Yeah.
And I didn't expect to be so moved, but I was, and I felt myself I felt a sense of loss. Anyway, I mean, I didn't mean to censor him. I just thought people in his circles might have felt tender about it, and that may go against him in some way. So from one perspective, don't do it because it could adversely impact you, for people who find you insensitive. But from the other perspective, I just thought it's disrespectful. I don't know. I mean, I get it. I get that there's negative sentiment, and there's been some commentators that have said now is the exact time to bring out the negative sentiment if you're feeling it, because the conversation's there and you're feeling a particular way. There was certainly, when Saddam Hussein was announced dead, there was a lot of jubilation.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't put them both in the same category, but that would be regarded as the opposite of what I've just sort of talked about. So I get that people can feel different ways, and so perhaps I should be a little bit more tolerant of that, but I still wanted to call him out for it because I wanted a voice to say, no, I don't believe that that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, there's we need to have space. We need to create the space for all of it. But I totally agree with you. Like, we should be able to respect someone at the time of death. We should be able to, like you said. But Saddam Hussein's a great example. Can you guys hear the back noise that's coming through?
Are you getting full back? Are you? Echo?
Yeah.
I can hear that now. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't really. I thought the way that death was handled. This is Saddam Hussein. I found that quite disturbing. So
Yeah.
I do believe that we should respect a person at that time.
Yeah, I find myself conflicted about it because I do realize, that both of these, all these things are true for different kinds of people at the same time.
Yeah.
I kind of felt that in terms of, the Queen, when you think of someone passing on, I kind of put them into the category of, we lost one of the good ones, or thank goodness, we've lost that one, right? So the Queen went, for me, in the category of someone, on the good ledger. Is it a career without any kind of blemish? Show me a 75-year-old career that has no blemishes. I mean, that's really going to be tough. And it's not one of those things where she chose it and she said, I want to apply for that job. It happened to her, right?
Yeah.
The monarchy, as much as people talk about it in terms of privilege and all those things, it's not something that people really make an active choice about. And if we look at Harry and Meghan, for instance, they make that choice. They make their own choices regarding it. We seldom think about it. I think in terms of this, right? Would I have rather have had anyone else in that particular role? I mean, it's a role that's there. Yeah, are we opposed to the idea of a monarchy? Perhaps we don't. But let's say there is a monarchy. Who would we rather have in that space? And the few people, I think, who can say they've conducted themselves in that way, than as well as she did. So in terms of I think one of the commentators mentioned that she did it with grace. And that was really, for me, that's what I described it as well. I mean, if someone did the job right, it was Queen Elizabeth.
Mm.
And to be fair, I'm with you on that, except that I'll be aware of my own blind spot on this one. I'm really only judging her for about the last 30 years, I guess. Yep. So if there was stuff that she did, early on in her reign, post World War II, with empires and other bits and pieces and, stuff like that, or doing deals on yachts in South Africa or whatever it was, I don't know anything about that. Mine is more the last 30 years. I think it's been respectful, dignified. I think as a head of state, going out and visiting the people who are suffering and trying to do right by them. And, I just think from that perspective, she's been a positive example of a really positive figurehead and a head of state that's been as dignified and respectful and respected which is something missing these days.
And challenging as well from a family dynamic. I mean, it's been the Real Housewives of Windsor Castle for the last 10 years, right? I mean, that's just crazy stuff. But I mean, I'll miss her, and I do understand all the stuff, the negative stuff that goes along with that. But I don't know whether you actually have her to be held accountable for it. She is the head of, or she was the monarch, the head of the country. But as you know, the way the politics works, she is a figurehead. Yeah.
What do you think, Andrea?
Well, no, I mean, I have respect for her as a woman and how she participated in the world and her sense of duty and service. So I have great respect for that. But I also come from the Commonwealth where we hear lots of other different layers of conversation, right? And the history, and I think of the Aboriginal community in Australia and what happened to them, which obviously happened in the name of British royalty. So, there's a lot of different aspects. And that's why I think it's important to have all the space. And, you know, as someone who was in the military, one of the things that I do have a respect for is, in my life, I'm not a fan of traditions, but I do value tradition because it, you know, especially, you know, what we've been seeing in the last week. And one of my favorite traditions that I'd never even knew existed is the royal beekeeper had to go and announce to the bees that the queen had died and had to wrap the hives up in black ribbon. Did you see that story? I thought that was just beautiful. And there's a lot of traditions and history and meaning, and some of them make absolutely no sense. But if you want to have a laugh, the Chaser are doing some really cool coverage of what's going on. You know, a lady who sleeps on a queen bed talks about how she can relate to the queen. You know, it's really kind of funny. So some of the media, they're going a little bit, you know, too far to find the stories.
Yeah, and I I was watching the ceremonial part. It seems like if you want to be in that ceremony, you have to wear a hat, and if you've got feathers, you're important. But it was the amount of hats were amazing, and I kind of liked it. But I took photos of the screen because it was so hatty. But switching it to Charles, it seems like the media is hoping he's going to screw up, and it seems like that, and they're putting on a magnifying glass for anything that he's getting, you know, exacerbated about. You know, there was the pen didn't work and the ink was spilt or something like that. And quite frankly, if I was Charles, I would be getting exactly the same as him. And I find myself a fairly level-headed person, but presumably I'm paying some butler besquillions to get a pen right and to get something that's not going to leak ink. And, you know, and I have billions of people watching me sign this thing. For heaven's sake, get it right. And don't put the ink tray right in front of me. And do I really need to have a fountain pen that has to take the ink up like that? I mean, honestly,
do you really have to make that gesture as well, Tim?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, but it's like dunking tea. Let's go with that one.
There you go.
I just think some of the stuff, you know, and then they've got these massive things that are, for two of them to be on the table, it's too big to be on the table to sign them both. Can't somebody just stand and hold one while he signs the other one without much of a problem? I mean, it just seems, it's like he shouldn't be expected to have to organize and event manage that. And so when he looks to the side and goes, and everyone zooms in and says, you know, he's two-faced, or there's this side to him and everything else. I just, you know, did you hear the story about the guy in the crowd that asked him to go out for a beer?
No.
So as he was doing the shaking of hands as he was going down, one fella shouted out, "You want to go for a beer?" And he said, "Yes." And then he probably thought better of it and called the fellow to the front and and he sort of pushed through the crowd and he said, "To tell me who you are and whatever and where you're from." And okay, well, everybody else, well, you know, unfortunately I have to keep going, but I would have loved to. And then he went on. I just thought, how awesome is that? And then they interviewed the fellow who asked him, and he just goes, "I don't know why I asked that. I just felt for him and I just sort of did. You know, what would you do for one of your mates? You'd sort of say, do you want to go for a beer?" So I don't know. There was some really nice moments. There was a woman who sort of gave him a kiss as he was going through the crowd. And I wish him well. I mean, he's been the first monarch's kid from Britain's side to have been under such media scrutiny in his teens and going forward. And there's been a lot of gaffes and screw ups, and he was sort of touted as this sort of playboy, and you know, and maybe he was, but no, maybe all of them were, and they're just none of them were in the news as much as him. And you know, the Diana thing obviously has been the big sort of hurt for the nation over his life. But you know, he's 73 years old. He's got a job now that, like you said about Elizabeth, I mean, it's not necessarily something they asked for. It's something that they could turn down, but it's something that they're going to do, and it is life consuming.
Yeah. So just to keep our show on track,
we're doomed.
You promised not to waffle, Tim.
I'm sorry about that. It was.
If I could just summarize, I don't know if you agree with this, but for the team, I think Queen Elizabeth left big shoes to be filled, which and that process of filling those shoes is a bit of a struggle. I think we'll agree.
Yeah.
Well, I hope he doesn't put them on.
Okay.
But
so part of this show is actually the weekend reads by by Andrea Edwards, and it's a massive task that happens all the time with her. She goes around looking for all the stories that matter. We don't have enough time to talk about all the stories, otherwise this would be a 4-hour show. But we have each got 3 stories that we'll talk about very quickly that are on the top of mind, and we'll introduce the queen of the show, please, to start us off with the news. Andrea.
No, what, Tim?
Actually, it's me.
Oh, he's the queen. Okay, sorry. Tim, the queen.
I'm not the queen, but okay. So the first story, I'm going to do something here. I'm going to show you this guy.
Yeah.
That there is Yvon Chouinard, and he's the CEO of Patagonia. And he announced that his family have transferred their ownership of Patagonia to which was being valued at about $3 billion, to a specially designed trust and a non-profit organization. That means all of the profits, basically, they've just released the company to this non-profit organization. And, all of its profits, like $100 million a year, will be used to combat climate change and protect undeveloped land around the globe, and really live his life's value and philosophy of really taking care of the environment. He was an avid climber from the 60s who started this company in 1973, and it's just gone on to represent a value, and he's wanted to make sure that when he passes, those values are maintained, and he didn't want to IPO it for exactly the reason where that control would be lost to stakeholder and shareholder interest, rather than taking care of its people and taking care of the planet. And so I just thought, fantastic. So the planet is now Patagonia's only shareholder. What do you think about that?
More, please. We need about 1 million businesses doing that. We might have a chance.
It's amazing what he's done. In Australia, sad loss, which has been a bit overshadowed by the ongoing news coverage of the death of the Queen, which perhaps has frustrated many Australians. But it's the news that Uncle Jack Charles, a revered Aboriginal actor and elder, has died. Amazing human being. He's had a hard life, but overcame and made an incredible mark. He was one of the stolen generation who, at age of 4 months old, I think, was taken away from his parents and tried to be assimilated. And there was a program in Australia those many years ago, a disgraceful program of trying to assimilate Aboriginals, remove them from their culture and assimilate them into white culture. So, but he had a lot of torment. He was abused as a kid, but found acting to be a very special way of expressing himself. And he always said he wished he'd had an elder like himself to be able to mentor him and help him not make some stupid decisions with white powders and various other drugs. And he spent some time in jail and stuff like that from his young age because he didn't have that mentorship. But now that mentorship establishment is very evident in Australia, which is fantastic. So he's been a real, I guess, a mark of a mentor, a mark of inspiration. Moving to next one. Oh, by the way, any comments on that one? Or we're not doing comments, we're doing thumbs up.
I think Jack and Archie are up wherever they are in their dreamland, playing music and singing songs. So
yeah, in previous no shows, we've also talked about human progress moving forward, but there's been some confusion over whether these will last a few years, whether these last few years have things have become worse or not. Well, it's official. Modern slavery has shot up by 10 million people in the last 10 years, which is a story to pay attention to because that's horrific. I mean, what do you know about modern slavery? By the way, those numbers were people who are including forced marriages.
Yeah.
So, indentured slavery, people get into debts and then they become slaves to somebody to pay them off, and forced marriages as well. But it's gone up by over 10 million people. And they were talking about some of the mass migrations being and this is something that we've been talking about for months on the No Show, about upcoming mass migrations due to water shortages. And that just puts a huge number of people at risk of these modern slavery practices. So yeah, it's incredible.
We need to build better infrastructure and get ready for this because it's happening. So yeah. All right, Joe, you're going to talk about the economy.
Well, yeah, there's so many things to talk about. So, of course, anybody who was paying attention the last few days would have realized the stock market has sort of like melted down, or at least showed signs of it. It's not something that's surprising. Everybody who is in the business has been calling that sort of thing was going to happen, and this really has not been the absolute meltdown. But a lot of experts are actually calling it the start of it. There are many people who are waiting for a pullback in the market who would have just said, okay, well, this is it. This moment is now. I'm going to jump in. As someone who studies the charts and along with a whole bunch of other people who are way more qualified than I am, the reading is that this is not going to be the end. As in, there's going to be a lot of buyers of the dip, but they're not going to be enough to support the market. That's the feeling that we have, because too many things are in place right now to make it tough. I've combined all the stories together, so I'm gonna talk about why that big move happened. It was all because of the inflation numbers, and it was because that they thought everybody had the kind of optimism that inflation had been beaten, and this was the big task for Biden, was to beat inflation. And so when it came to it would have been Wednesday morning when the market opened, or I think it could be Thursday. It could be Thursday morning when the market opened. There was inflation data that came out, and it was not as good as they thought it would be. So the optimism would have been that at least it would have not changed. It wouldn't have gotten worse. It actually got a little bit more worse. And why that was such a big deal is because it makes the future steps inevitable. The future steps essentially are the steps where the Fed is going to have to increase the lending rate, and that's going to increase the cost of acquiring money, which is going to be a pressure on all things financial. And so simultaneously, the market plummeted. I mean, it was a thing to behold. I was trading at the time, and literally almost anything that was related to the US dollar changed massively. Shifts that would take a day happened within a second. And that was the kind of thing. The news was that momentous because of the inevitability of all the things that are to come. So when it comes to the Fed's announcement, it's not going to be the thing now is not a question of if they're going to say they're going to have to reduce or increase the rates. There seems very little else that can be done but to increase those rates, and that's going to be a lot of pain for the economy because that's going to slow everything down. The housing market, for instance, is in danger of collapsing in 210 of the U.S. housing markets. Because the risk is there now that it could lose as much as 20% of the home values. Now, the way it works is because a lot of, like all of us, we have mortgages. And when you increase the lending rate, that throws a whole wave of increases in rates across the board. Now, some people are just barely getting by right now as it is. Some people, even at this rate, are already throwing in the towel, literally throwing in the keys to the owner and say, you know what, take this. I don't need to do this mortgage anymore. To go into the bank and literally just hand over the keys because that's the cheaper, easier option. When you add the fact that it's going to become even more expensive, and anybody who is in a market because they are able to, because of credit, suddenly now face a situation where they can't, homes are going to get released without they're going to be foreclosed on, and that always causes a cascade. So the big risk right now is what happens. There's a little bit of time right now, but the expectation, as I said, once the Fed makes its announcement, is the wave of increase in rates is going to go through the entire economy. And that's why everybody had such either a terrible or a fantastic day a few days ago. So that's basically all of the finance news, or not all of it, but just the main stuff.
Taste of it. That's why you haven't been sleeping very well, right?
Nope, terrible.
All right. So in the Ukraine, we've obviously seen a lot of news in the last couple of weeks, but more recently, the stories of success that Ukraine's taken. I think it's like 1,000 square miles they've retaken, and there's a lot of talk about victory being imminent, and that's happening a lot in the media. But on the other side, I'm following a lot of military and political sort of commentators and experts. And they're saying that this war's got a long way to go, but the confidence that Ukraine can succeed and win this war has gone up, which means, of course, they're going to get access to more weapons. But there's another really big conversation that's taking place in the media and on social media that isn't in the mainstream, and that is what's next. So Putin fails in a situation like this, there's a very, very, very strong chance that he'll be outed. But there's no succession plan in place for him, right? There's nobody being groomed to take over because Putin's in charge, and that's the end of it. In fact, anyone who looked like they could potentially take over is in jail, poisoned, or they accidentally fell off a balcony, right? So this is going to create a lot of destabilization. And there's also this really rising far right, like far right movement, and they are furious about what's going on in Ukraine, and they're ashamed that Russia's losing it. And these guys are the crazy ones, like the really, really crazy ones. And they, if they could get into power or have any influence, I mean, then we could be looking at some pretty significant stuff. And then, of course, yesterday we saw the subtle conversation that went on between President Xi and Putin, where China expressed questions and concerns. So from all I'm reading, while the war is shocking and we want it to be over as quickly as possible, what's next, as far as Russia's concerned could be even more destabilizing. And of course, we don't know what Putin could do in a desperate situation if there's so much pressure on him. Who knows what he's capable of doing. So that's a story to pay attention to, but pay attention to the other side of the story of what's going to happen with Russia next. I think that's a really important piece of the story as well. There was an environment update. Another climate report states the world's chance of avoiding the worst ravages of climate breakdown are diminishing rapidly. And seriously, some of the stuff I'm reading, you would be terrified of what's coming at us if you actually were reading what I was reading. We are moving into an uncharted territory of destruction, and we've already seen it. It's already begun. It's just going to get worse. And, our chances of staving off catastrophe are going down every day that we delay. Tim, you got a final one?
Yeah, finale to add to the news. Ken Starr, the notorious investigator of the Bill Clinton impeachment, is dead. Remember Ken Starr?
Yeah.
Well, Monica Lewinsky, amazing tweet. She tweeted, "As I'm sure many can understand, my thoughts about Ken Starr bring up complicated feelings, but of more importance is that I imagine it's a painful loss for those who love him." How dignified is that? Good on her.
Yeah, exactly. The person who most harmed in that was her. Have you watched her TED Talk on shame?
No.
I think everyone in the world should watch that TED Talk. It's such an important TED Talk. And also we should all sort of check ourselves that, when there's a scandal like that in the future, and if there's a woman in the center of that scandal, that not all, Bill Clinton was fine, right? She wasn't. It destroyed her life. And watch her TED Talk. It's very, very powerful.
Weirdly enough, the other one who probably lost a great opportunity was Hillary.
Yep, absolutely.
I think she could have been president. I think that marred her. That it instead of her being here, she was lessened because of what Bill did.
Yep, and the fact she stayed with him as well.
Yeah.
Right? So, but the women always suffer. It's really quite remarkable. All right, so in the remaining time, we're doing all right, aren't we, time-wise? We're going to talk about this story that appeared in The Guardian, and I need to share it. But the title is "The Super Rich Preppers Planning to Save Themselves from the Apocalypse." And this appeared in The Guardian just in the last couple of weeks. So the author is a guy called Douglas Rushkoff, and I've just bought his book. But he was invited to address a group mysteriously described as ultra wealthy stakeholders. And this guy is he predicts technology trends. And he had to go out into the middle of the desert to meet these people. So this is how his story starts. He's never met people of more wealth in his life. And the conversation started with, first of all, he thought he was going to speak, and then he wasn't. He was basically six of them sat around in a table and had a conversation. And it started with Bitcoin or Ethereum, virtual reality or augmented reality. Who will get quantum computing first, China or Google? So that's kind of the beginning, right? But then they got stuck into the questions that they really invited this guy to answer. New Zealand or Alaska? Which region would be less affected by the coming climate crisis? Which was the greater threat, global warming or biological warfare? How long should one plan to be able to survive with no outside help? Should a shelter have its own air supply? What was the likelihood of groundwater contamination? And the last one, how do I maintain authority over my security force after the event? And the event is a euphemism for environmental collapse, social unrest, nuclear explosion, solar storm, unstoppable virus, or malicious computer hacks that take everything down. When I read it, there's so much about this article that I loved, and that's why I wanted to talk about it today. The first thing was, there's a lot of clarity in those questions, didn't you think?
Yeah, it's very west. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's solving problem.
If you've hired a futurist, I mean, those are the questions to ask. I know
they're not a futurist.
Someone is.
They're not a futurist,
Right.
and they say that in the article. I'm not a futurist. People think I am a futurist. I talk about technology trends, but but that was, because if they wanted a futurist, they could get one, or security advisor, but actually it was more of a philosophical conversation, which I thought was really interesting.
I just again, this is the thing about even if you don't identify yourself as a futurist and people look to you and say you always know where the trend is going, you are a futurist.
Yeah, I agree.
That's what I mean. Okay, so when I read about the various things they talked about, are we going to talk about what they talked about first, or just the initial reaction to
what
are there any answers to the questions?
I think there'll always be questions. There'll always be answers to those questions. I formed some answers along the way as well, and I actually think if you ask me about whether or not it was a good thing to do, I mean, seriously, absolutely. And in terms of whether I'm super wealthy or not, to prepare for the future is completely what all of us should do, right? And what you can do is you can only use the resources that you have. You can pull the levers that you have. And if you're super wealthy, I'm afraid some of the levers that you have available are going to be slightly different and gold plated. I mean, or made actually of diamonds, right? I mean, that's the way it works. So there's a great sense of unhappiness that I'm feeling just from the vibe of when we look at the story, and I kind of have to look. I kind of have to look at it from the perspective of the Guardian, right? I mean, the Guardian is pushing your buttons with the story. It isn't saying something about how incredibly clever it is of the wealthy people to figure out plans like this to kind of look after to ensure survival. What they're actually doing is saying to you, well, this is what you can't have.
I don't agree. I don't agree with that. Just because it's a transcript from the book. It's not the Guardian pushing an angle. And I know a lot of people have got weird opinions about the Guardian, but this is literally a transcript from the book. So I don't take the Guardian sort of angle for that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, I think it's about choosing. The Guardian still has to editorialize. It still chooses. I think what it wants to put in there. And this particular discussion, I mean, seriously, it does exactly to me as a media consumer as it's supposed to, right? Which is supposed to make me go like, oh, I'm angry about this. I want to react to it. I thought about it actually in terms of myself. Given that if someone shows me that the future is going to be such, what am I going to do about it? What do I do, right? I mean, a lot of people don't address it, don't even look at it. And so what we are essentially, I feel anyway, that we're mad about is that these people are actually doing something about it. The other thing about this is the way it seems like this is the only solution that the super wealthy are adopting, that all they're doing is looking after their self-preservation. I don't see room for it where they go like someone is doing this and they're also trying to solve the problem. You know what I mean? I mean, the assumption is the super wealthy are going to bury themselves into the ground in safety and do nothing. For me, is what is a sustainable thing? If I am someone, okay, but let's take luck out of the whole equation, and let's say I am I become one of the super wealthy because I'm kind of super smart and I have some different ideas and I've been very clever about things, right? Your obligation is kind of to survive, so that you can try and solve the problem. You can be part of the solution. I mean, that's just my idea. Of course, it doesn't mean that everybody who's there is there to try and contribute in that way. But that's just my 2 cents on that one. It's not automatically a bunch of evil people who've decided to leave everything behind. I think they, they're doing what they must, I feel.
Yeah, I got a couple of different takes on it. One is, if they are meeting there and they're building their shelter and their private army, then one of the ways out for everybody is to join their private army. So if you really want to be protected,
they're talking about putting collars on their private army so that they can keep them subservient and
okay, then I'm not going to. The other thing is that a world you're really going to want to live in anyway? Yeah. This post-apocalyptic, if the world goes to crap like this, trying to protect yourself in it, good luck to you. But if you get through it, what's left? And then as the mega billionaire with a million cans of tomato soup were locked up downstairs. We've seen this all happen in the post Second World War nuclear stuff, where people were building their giant shelters underground, and there was movies made. I can't remember what was the movie called, something man, where he was the fellow that was the lead in The Mummy. He was underground with his dad. His dad was Christopher Walken, and he was the lead in The Mummy. What was his name?
This sounds like a really bad game of charades.
It was a hilarious movie.
Brendan Fraser.
It's a fantastic movie. I love it. And he
we're no closer to the name of the show. Okay.
Yeah, because the thing locks itself there. We can find out pretty quickly. But anyway, and then there was a bunch of newsletters that I subscribed to about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, where some of them were the naysayers about what's going to happen, and that you got to have silver coins and some gold, and you got to have it in a chest somewhere and hidden somewhere in your house and protected and all of that, because what are you going to be trading with? The currency system was down. It's only going to come down to these precious metals and all this sort of stuff. And it was a lot of doom and gloom. And look, hey, these sorts of stories are going to come up quite often. What's nice about this story is, if these mega wealthy dudes are asking Bitcoin or Ethereum, I'm like, great. Good. At least one of them is going to survive. And then and then the other one is, who gets quantum computing first, China or Google? I like how it's not China or the USA. It's China or a company. And so I thought, that's kind of interesting. And then, but I do find it, the big thing that came through to me while listening to that was, you're ultra wealthy and you want to hide rather than try and fix the problem, and use your influence to really change everything and say, hey, hand on heart, I made a lot of my money doing this, but this has got to stop. Yeah. So
there was a lot of things that came through it. So one of the quotes: never before have our society's most powerful players assumed that the primary impact of their own conquests would be to render the world itself unlivable for everyone else. And that's one of the sort of real angles that sort of stood out. What they're doing is creating the problem, and all they're doing now is working out how to survive what they created. So I found that really interesting. But then this other guy that gets brought into this, his name is J.C. Cole, right? And so he sort of witnessed the whole sort of birth of the post-Soviet empire, and really, worked out how to rebuild societies from scratch. And so what he's done is he's built this community farm where his family, people that he likes, he wants to get a doctor and a dentist, which is very sensible, security detail, everything to protect this farm. But at the same time, they're building another farm for the society. And he can't get anyone to invest in this idea, but his whole sort of focus is, I'm going to take care of myself, but I also want to create something collective so that everybody can be taken care of. And the language of this group of five didn't talk about anybody else. It really was, how do we do it? Do we, am I the only person with the key to the food cabinet, rather than, how do we make sure that the lady with the baby that comes to the gate, desperate for food, how do we deal with that moral dilemma? And he's thinking about that stuff, right? But the other big thing that just really came through for me is that we can't expect anyone to step in and take care of us if this catastrophe falls on our shoulders. And by all indications, it's coming. And the fact that those sort of people are sitting down having that conversation and spending money on having that conversation and spending their time, which is more important than money for people like that, tells you that this is a real concern from people sitting at the middle of the business and the investment world, and we should be paying attention. Just because they're paying attention, so we should be paying attention. And so many people are not paying attention. They're not paying attention at all. So we're gonna be overrun with this grief when we have to face up to something that we are not even remotely paying attention to. And that's my biggest concern right now. You know, I talk to people about this all the time. What are you doing? You know, people thinking about their money, people thinking about pensions, people thinking about the future. You know, where you live, is it safe? Do you need to move your family somewhere safer? You know, I hear people telling me their dreams, and I'm sitting there thinking, but there's going to be no water available in that part of the world probably within about 10 years. You know, is that really a dream that you want to follow? You know, so we're not thinking about it, but these guys are, and that's what we should be paying attention to. They're paying attention, which should be a sign that we should be paying attention. Does that make sense?
It does, depending on who they are.
Well, the type of multi billionaires that we're talking about here, that are sitting in that room having that conversation, you know.
Okay, so a lot of this, and I'm going to put it down to something else as well, right? Which is essentially fear, right? It's to think that wealthy people have no fear. It's ridiculous, because they are fearful, and if anything, they have even more reason to be fearful. You have to combine that with the fact that there's also a multi-billion-dollar marketing machine that wants to get this stuff out there, because this is the world that we live in right now, where I can tell you that story and you kind of go like, I can buy that, I can believe that. So this is the kind of story where I can tell you that, and the world's going to be very, very tough at the time. There's going to be all kinds of anarchy. We're going to protect ourselves from that, because we have got this system of building ourselves into an impenetrable hill where access is only granted to those who have a special Ethereum wallet. And it's going to be embedded in the back of your eye, so that it's going to be totally secure in all different things, right? And that's the kind of thing that you can sell to someone who is fearful about something that they have no control over. You know, the thing about this is, in terms of what it is, it's a sales pitch about past the end of what we have right now. It's not a sales pitch about what we have currently. It's not like I, living in Bukit Timah, feels like I want to upgrade myself to now remove myself from sunlight, even though personally I think that's a really good idea. Most people want to have a nice garden, they want to have all that space outside, but they're thinking in terms of, when it all goes to shit, if it does, this is my insurance policy. And that's the thing about insurance. Insurance is something you buy, hopefully in a way that you'll never have to use it. It is like we talk about the apocalypse, right? We're also trying to avoid the apocalypse. And when will we decide that the apocalypse has happened? With someone right now from the 70s looking at today, going like, "Oh, the apocalypse has happened. The environment is completely screwed. We're getting all these storms everywhere." I mean, if you describe the past 2 weeks in weather to someone in the 70s and said the apocalypse is here, they would agree. Yeah. So whether or not we're in the apocalypse, whether there's a consensus that we're in apocalypse, I think is separate from what this is about. This is about, after that has happened, what do you do, right? If we've gone through everything else and all of it has failed spectacularly, then now what are we going to do? We're now going to be in a very hostile environment. I mean, okay, let's look in the future, right? The world has ended because of weather. Who are you going to blame straight away? Right?
America.
I mean, we're not going to say just anybody. We're going to look at the rich folk, because someone's going to be telling that story. It's going to be very believable. Bill Gates is going to have a tough time finding someone to welcome him as well, because even if he's doing everything he can to try and solve the problem, somebody in the back of the room is going to be able to stand up, point a finger at him and say, "You caused this." And there's going to be a lot of people who say, "Yeah," because it's going to be absolutely convenient to do that. You're absolutely right. We have to do something about this. We have to take responsibility for what we have to, like we haven't done ourselves. And I know the human race is famously good at doing that.
Well, so I think the next 5 years. So, like, when you use words like the apocalypse, right? And I don't find that sort of terminology very useful. Obviously, we get up to 3.2, we're certainly going to be in an apocalypse. But the next 5 years are going to be really interesting. So we're having the third La Nina year, which means that for the next sort of 12 months or so, we can probably guarantee the weather patterns based on what we've seen for the last couple of years. So we know what that looks like, right? But it's when El Nino comes back in next that we're going to experience the first 1.5 degrees before. So we're going to experience it within the next 5 years before it becomes embedded. And so, just the other day, I was wandering around this community in Phuket town, just sort of capturing some footage of the waste and the rubbish that's in the water and sort of trying to say to the community, come on, let's solve this problem, get it out. But the places that these people are living in are literally tin sheds. So if it gets above 1.5 degrees, there is no way these people can survive. In just living in those tin sheds, they cannot survive. And, it was really hot already, but what are we going to do to help them? So, if it becomes runaway and these 5 tipping points, 6 tipping points we're supposed to be hitting soon, the first thing we'll probably see is sea rise. And that's going to sort of gradually start taking away shorelines. I was looking at this construction of this villa complex the other day, and I know that beach is one of the beaches that's going to get, washed away. So where the world's dealing with the emissions of these constructions taking place in places that will no longer, no one's ever going to live in those houses, or maybe a year or two, right?
Yep.
But they're still selling them, they're still building them. And it's like, when are we going to wake up to this? For the people, for the developer, it's not a good story, right? But at the same time, the developer should have been paying attention to this a long time ago. Why would you build near the beach? It just doesn't make any sense. So I don't know. We're not thinking about this in the right way. I mean, we have, there was another article that we didn't bring up today that talks about how the world's economists have basically recognized that they need to start aligning the future economic predictions to climate science. I mean, the fact that they haven't had that epiphany before is a bit shocking, don't you think? Like when we were talking about the economy the last time we were here, the famine, the famine that's here, but, the French food shortages that are coming, that are going to have a huge impact, but every country is going to experience food shortages. So we've just got to start really thinking about it, but we have to operate as a community. If it's each for their own, then we're going to get anarchy, and then we're going to have an apocalypse, and it's Mad Max future. But if we come together, with or without our governments, we can get prepared and face up to what's coming. If you're doing your renovation in your house and it's going to be underwater in a couple of years' time, you're wasting money, but you're also creating emissions. Be agile, be ready to move, start looking at it. And if people are stupid enough to buy a house that's going to be underwater in a couple of years, well, more fool them. The first we'll know of it is when our insurance claims go skyrocket because our house is considered vulnerable. So the insurance industry is onto the vulnerability of the climate impacts. The scientists are obviously aware, but the banks are starting to be aware. I think it was the Commonwealth Bank of Australia realised how much of its mortgage portfolio was under threat from climate risks. And they've only just done that just in the last few months. So there's but we've got to take some responsibility here and pay attention. If you need to move, could be a good time to be thinking about it,
So I know the capitalist argument is very seldom popular in the solving of the world's problems because it causes so much of it. But I think where we are is we're in a place where the market does have to move back and forth. That's the way it is. The market does swing left, swing right. In politics, it becomes left wing, it becomes more right wing. and we keep passing and missing the center, it seems. So the kind of thing that's going to happen in terms of the environment is kind of like what happened to the watch market in China, right? So everybody thinks, okay, it's going to be, it's a great investment. Just get some very expensive watches, finely made watches, and just keep buying, and they're going to keep going up in value, and that's going to be fantastic. That's the consensus, right? And then what happens is suddenly it's not a great idea, right? And it takes a lot of not a great idea moments before people go like, you know what, it's not a great idea. I mean, the evidence of this for me is the number of people in the US who live on a tornado corridor. I don't understand why you can do that once and then not say, you know what, not a good idea. Instead of which they rebuild and go like, well, if it's coming, it's coming. Well, you know what? I've been living in Singapore, haven't been exposed to a tornado very much here, so that's my choice about that. The same with living on a fault where literally the big earthquake can come and put you all in the ocean. But still
so Alaska versus New Zealand.
So there's a little bit about bad decision making that is inherent in human behavior, and it's also inherent actually in what makes us great. It's our ability to not see how terrible things are that actually allows us to move forward. Because if you look at everything right now, we're supposed to say nobody have any children, nobody fall in love. It's not going to be worthwhile. We should never do anything for ourselves. We should just stay here and let death overcome us. Why do we do this at all? Let's give up.
Okay, there's an article. There was an article in the New Republic which was titled "Marjorie Taylor Greene's New Climate Theory is Absurd. It's also very smart." And let me just explain a little bit about what was in that. It's basically the shift of the Republican argument from climate denial to climate delay. Okay, so have you been aware of that? So it's like we're not the party that's denying it because it's obviously happening. Yeah, no, we've never denied it. But it's just not going to happen as fast as everybody's saying. But the reason why her theory, they were saying her theory is absurd, but it's also very smart, is her theory is actually climate change is great. Because look at how many people die because of the cold. And so I know. So that's the absurd part. And then it's like, and then there's this, benefit, and then there's that benefit. The reason why they said, okay, so that's the absurd part. The absurd part is to try and say, like you said, the people living in tin sheds are going to be basically living in ovens. It's going to be unlivable. Yeah. And there's going to be, with the water shortages and the melting glaciers and all of that sort of stuff, the mass migration due to the lack of water going to be, World War water is, that's the last one. But when they say it's very smart, the reason why they're saying it's very smart is they're trying to sell the shift to climate delay through positivity. And and so it's, how do we paint the picture that making these changes is great? It's not avoid pain, it's instead move to good. How do we come up with climate positive solutions or activities? And typically the argument's going to be, well, if you want that forest and you love that park, we have to do it. But it's going to be, how can we make it even greener? How can we make it even more beautiful? How can we make this available to us? How can we find solutions that we can continue to travel without causing emissions? That would be brilliant. And so it's, how do we paint the solution with a positive brush rather than paint the activity with a fear of impending doom? And by the way, the top of that, let me go back to that image. The top of that says apocalypse soon. Section. Okay, so it's not apocalypse now, it's apocalypse soon because it's delay.
You'll have to share the link to the article. It's so interesting. So delay and positivity seem to be two of the American sort of ideas around what we're facing. And if the GOP get back in, and the Republican Democrat, I'm not pro-Trump, but whatever America votes for. But if we vote a party in that has a message of delay, then that is going to hurt the people, and it's going to hurt the world, right? We haven't got time for that sort of mentality in public life. But the positivity thing, so the American media are trying to share information about the climate emergency in a positive way, because they don't want people getting too upset, and people don't like to read. Just the other day I did my climate courage thing, and some friends have said, I know it's really important, but it's really hard to listen to. And when I did it, I'm like, I know this is hard. I've been trying to share a negative message for a long time, and I've been trying to work out how to share a negative message in a way that people actually want to listen to. And it's not because I want to share a negative message. It's because we need to pay attention, because we're all at risk now. Like the equator will become an unlivable zone. So Joe, sitting there in Bukatima, you're going to be living in an unlivable zone, and Singapore's going to sort itself out and do what it can. But the day might come where you guys have to migrate, right? I can migrate north and south. Tim, I think you can too, right? But mass migration, if we go too far, Singapore can potentially build its infrastructure to support a 1.5 degree world, but it can't hold back the oceans forever, even though it's got incredible infrastructure in place. So, we can't put a positive spin on something.
Yeah, I guess I'm. So what
we're
they're
not
doing
even doing the minimum, right? We're not doing the minimum to address it yet. So until we do, we can't put a positive spin. And then we were talking about the aerosol effect, and I've been reading more about that. And things are not looking good on that front either. So anyway,
Tim, you go first.
I was just going to say, greenwashing is the positive spin, or greenwashing is we're doing something about it when we're really not. Or it's a tiny percentage of what the business is really doing, but it's a massive percentage of our marketing. The positive spin about their message is, if they want to provide a message of climate delay in climate action, because it's not going to happen as soon as everyone says, don't worry about it. They're putting a positive spin on why climate change is good. I mean, that's just nonsense. But having something positive to look forward to, rather than, because the reason why people aren't listening to the hard message is because it seems like you can't enjoy everything you have now anymore.
Yeah.
And so if I listen to the message, then I have to, it's like, alcohol's bad for you. Stop drinking it. It's proven it's bad for you, but everyone keeps drinking it. Why? Because if I listen to that message, I won't get to enjoy this escape that I have. And it's exactly the same thing with this. But there's got to be a good end to it. There's got to be if I do this, like I manage change management organizations all the time, give them the light at the end of the tunnel for going through the dip of productivity and discomfort and change and upgrades of systems and everything else. It's what's the beautiful not the utopia, but what's the promised land? Because at the moment it's desolation. So I'm going to avoid the message.
So it's not, basically every minute that we delay, the desolation gets worse. So it's not about what you can get out of it. It's about how bad do you want the future to be for your children? So it's something humanity's never had to face before, this sort of big decision. But that's our responsibility. We have to accept being a bit miserable in our lives, because trust me, I've been a bit of a miserable cow this year, really coming to terms with how far we've come. Not expecting this till 2050, not expecting this till 2080. I've had to, really move forward in my thinking. And I find it hard to be joyful in social situations, and I hate it. But at the same time, like when I'm around people who are joyful, I know that they're not paying attention, because if they were, they couldn't be joyful. So it's not a joyful awareness. And really what we've got to do is accept it and try to make sure that it's not absolutely horrific. I was reading one of the professors, I don't know if I've said this before, a child born today is expected to have a life expectancy of 30 to 40 years, the majority of which will be terrible. Like, isn't that motivation enough to make sure that doesn't happen? You know
what? I think what would be an interesting message is, or framing of the message is, the world's got cancer. It's we need surgery. We need to go through chemo, but we can come out the other end with something to live for.
Yeah.
But the doctor has said the world's got cancer. And people can relate to that message because there is chemo's going to be hard. It's operable, but there's an end, maybe, that we can come out with life.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's a.
I know it's really challenging because
it's got to be a message, something like that jolts, but it says.
I think we need different language too, Tim. You know, and we need to think in a different way than we've ever done before. And you know, we're at the end now, but it's a really complicated thing. I know I'm with you. And, you know, we could talk about just that topic for a long time. You know, but I think we just need to be grown-ups.
I just want to throw this in before we run out of time. But, you know, essentially, if you think about the idea of the promised land, the promised land would have been meaningless without the Egyptians. So, you know, this is the whole thing about, and if you don't understand that reference, please read the Bible. But we need a number of things to happen. One is the very, very clear sense that the horrible end is very, very clear, right? People need to have that sense. They have to be convinced of it. You know, there's some people who say, like, you know, I'll never give up my beliefs and what I do. Everything, I'll never give up. And put a gun on their head and they go like, you know what? Hey, take it, right?
Yeah.
We need that moment, and that actually the gun to the head thing is exactly it, right? The promised land is survival, and it only looks better when you look at what is the alternative. And when you believe the alternative is exactly what it's said to be right now, then you go like, okay, I think I can do that, right? Yeah. Right now, we continue to do what we do because the future that we don't think is absolutely true, you know, it's negotiable. And that's where that positivity comes in. You're right that being positive is a great thing, except when you're in trouble. You know, the last thing you want when the plane's going down is someone who's positive.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that whole positive psychology movement, I mean, I think, you know, that's like the people who really believe and embrace that idea, I think they're really going to struggle the most, you know. And I think Oprah did an amazing job for many, many years, sort of really waking people up, and it was beautiful. But I think actually now those people are not armed with the strength of character that they need, because this is about being courageous and brave and strong, and it's about sacrificing our joy so that our children have a chance, you know. And yeah, anyway, so what's keeping you distracted at the moment? Because I certainly need distractions at the moment. Really quick, and we'll wrap it up.
Time travel.
Time travel.
Okay.
I was watching a Korean drama called Alice.
Okay.
And it gets extraordinary. It's plausible apart from the time travel, but it's plausible up to a part where you go, hang on a minute. And at that point, my wife checked out, and I saw it through. I kept going. Well, I'm going to let the paradoxes go. I'm going to just see it through. I've invested 8 hours in this already. I'm going to finish the 16 or whatever it was. But I really enjoyed it. I mean, I just enjoyed it. I haven't watched too many Korean dramas before, but it got very convoluted with the time travel. The poor guy kept meeting his mother in various times over and over and over again. And anyway, it was a nice watch. I liked it. Joe?
Awesome. Doesn't appeal to me at all.
I've been watching a lot of background noise TV while trading, so I won't mention any of those, but I'll talk about 2 series that I binge watched, and I recommend you consume, especially if you feel that there is no room in the world for drugs. Check out Changing Your Mind on Netflix. It's aptly titled, and it's a very interesting study about it. And also on Netflix is the other series, The Future Of, and that talks about a number of things. It's really good. It brings up a few ideas which I had not thought about, and it's made me go, okay, now I'm gonna try and figure out how to make that happen.
Nice. I've been watching a series called Blacklist on Netflix. It's a bit corny, but for some reason when I start watching it, I can't stop. But It's if you because I'm just looking for distraction, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing, if you haven't had a chance to watch it, do watch Me Time. Have you guys watched it yet? It's absolutely hilarious. If you just had a good belly laugh, have you watched it, Joe? No.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, Kevin Hart continues to fall forward into how bad an actor he is. But what I love about it is, in the moment, he's the most committed to in the moment, he's most committed to that moment, right?
Yeah.
And that's the fun that Kevin Hart brings to any situation.
It's good,
He's,
is it?
he's done a it's absolutely hilarious. It's absolutely brilliant. Mark Wahlberg as well. I love him. I think he's really great comedy. But Kevin Hart's also done a series which is called Real Life or something, or True Story or something. Brilliant. I think he's still underestimated. But
well,
yeah,
Kevin Hart's the guy who has run happily along and filled the space that Will Smith left behind. In terms of being someone who is a hard worker and who seems to be doing okay with the rest of the world. He's not saying the wrong things too often, but he's also, he's an edgier comedian, so he has more room to make mistakes.
Yeah, well, The Rock likes him, so I like The Rock. Greg Jessamins here said, great discussion, thanks. And he's also given us a podcast to check out for that's aligned, I suppose, to what we're talking about. Anyway, we've gone 5 minutes over. We're doing well,
Very well. I thought today's format worked really well.
Good. All right, so we're going to stick with it. So we get some guest speakers in to join us, and
then it won't.
And then they can join in on the new structure. Yeah. All right, guys. Have a great weekend. Watch Me Time if you need a giggle, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Bye.
All right.
Cheers.
Take care.